Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist is a publication founded by Manhattan Project scientists. They understood that the technology that they had just created, the new age that they had really started, would necessitate a broad public conversation about the military, political, scientific, ethical issues that this new technology had created.
I used to think about the Bulletin as, because of the name of atomic scientists, it was about nuclear war. But Since 2007, the Bulletin has included climate change as a threat to our well-being.
Look at what happened with COVID. That's not something anybody expected to happen, and it happened and is continuing to happen. We have not eliminated COVID from our world. So we don't have a choice at the Bulletin but to include the biological risk in our calculus of the Doomsday Clock.
The Doomsday Clock symbolizes the risk to humanity from the collection of dangerous technologies and activities that humans are responsible for.
Using the clock, the Bulletin's able to inform the public about the nature of the threats facing humanity and to encourage them to actually get more involved, to take action, and to be aware of whether or not we're moving closer to or farther away from our own destruction.
Last year, the Bulletin set the Doomsday Clock at 89 seconds to midnight, the closest to disaster it's ever been. So now the question is, how does this year compare to last year?
So the deliberations of the Science and Security Board that set the Doomsday Clock every year are pretty intense. In the past, it's often been quite complicated and hard to come up with the movement of the clock in a defined time. We didn't have those challenges this year.
In every area, we have failed to take the steps that are necessary to reduce risks, and there are new developments in every area that make the risks greater.
In nuclear, we are seeing leaders across the globe with nuclear weapons accelerate their development of new weapons, talk about arms racing and trying to outdo the other, the possibility of resuming nuclear testing, deploying new, more dangerous types of nuclear weapons, and active conflicts among and between nuclear states and in regions of nuclear tension. You have now many countries around the world investing tens of billions of dollars to modernize and diversify their nuclear arsenals. You're seeing the leaders of those countries talk more willingly about the utility of nuclear weapons, not just in a political sense. Can we use our nuclear weapons to deter our adversary, or can we use our nuclear capability to coerce our competitors into certain actions, but to actually use nuclear weapons on the battlefield, as Russia has threatened to do, as Pakistani officials have threatened to do. And you see what we refer to as arms race instability. And this is how we ended up with over 70,000 nuclear weapons between the United States and Soviet Union during the Cold War. The decline has stopped, and we're now seeing the growth begin again, and the potential for a worldwide arms race is upon us. In 9 days, the last remaining agreement between the United States and Russia that limits the number of strategic nuclear weapons they can each possess and deploy will expire, and there is no agreement to replace it. So for the first time in generations, both of these countries will be free to deploy as many nuclear weapons as they want or believe they need. That is the fundamental spark for what could be a nuclear calamity.
Every year, the fever goes up. Every year we break another record. The warmest 10 years are in the last 10 years. There's a metabolism to the planet, the ecosystems, the oceans. There's a whole metabolism, and the fever that's in a warming temperature is damaging everything. It's influencing everything. Since the 1800s, since the Industrial Revolution, we can document the increase in temperature around the world. And now we have satellites that monitor the ecosystems, the oceans. But with what is happening now, and why I'm so worried, is that I feel like my fever is going to put me close to the ICU. And the monitoring devices are going away.
The initial focus of the Bulletin was the nuclear threat, that later expanded to include the threat from climate change. And then we realized that there were other areas of emerging technology that could, if not properly managed, pose a threat to the survival of humanity, that could pose the risk of catastrophe. Artificial intelligence, like large language models, have become increasingly powerful and now can create photos, videos that look just like the real thing and can be used to spread disinformation very effectively. We've seen this even from President Trump, using such videos to try to persuade people that things have happened that have not happened, that there are perhaps riots in a location or acts of war that aren't fake. A particular concern I have is placing weapons in space as part of the President Trump's proposed Golden Dome, which has called for the placing of missile defense interceptors in space. And while those would not be probably useful in protecting us against nuclear attack, they would be able to be used against other objects in space. And this could trigger a competition with Russia and China to place their weapons in space and pose the possibility of a war in space.
AI and bio are not necessarily things that if they came together, they would be horrible and terrible and negative. We can use AI to help us respond better, be more efficient, have a better idea of what do we have. We've seen cuts, massive cuts by this administration to preparedness activities. But what that's done then is that it has reduced our overall preparedness. We are not going to be able to be as effective and as efficient in responding as a result. It's not a reasonable situation to be in because we have not eliminated disease, we have not eliminated accidents, we haven't eliminated all these things that we need to respond to. We're all interdependent now in this world. We don't have good public health in one country, it affects the next country, the ones surrounding, but also the countries elsewhere that were dependent on the first country for funding, for human resources, for expertise, and so forth. This is a global issue.
So overall, 2025 has been a pretty bleak picture in terms of advancing existential risks. I would say the one silver lining is I think people are starting to re-engage every time we've been able to reduce threats, existential threats to humanity. It's because of the public pressure that was created on policymakers, on local elected leaders, on the world in general to say, we do not accept this.
The average citizen can do more than just vote. They can actually be informed about the threats that they face and talk with their neighbors, their relatives, their friends in their communities about these risks. And just showing up at a political meeting of a senator or congressman can actually drive policy. If they recognize that there's a political interest in their districts, that drives action.
You have to empower the people to say, yes, this is a challenging opportunity, and this is what, by working together, we can do something.
And just imagine what would happen if the whole world, all of our citizens, all throughout the world, were actually to take up the issue of turning back the clock. What would happen? I can't imagine a situation in which that enormous group of people would somehow be ineffectual.
The Doomsday Clock is really a metaphor for the amount of danger that we're in. It's pointing to the urgency of the threats all around us, but it's also a call to action. I actually see it as a positive symbol insofar as we have time left to fix the problems that we ourselves have created by working together, by creating the necessary political will and the scientific analysis that will help us save ourselves, for lack of a better term, from ourselves. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alexandra Bell, and I am the President and CEO of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. It is the determination of the Bulletin's Science and Security Board that humanity has not made sufficient progress on the existential risks that endanger us all. We thus move the clock forward. The Doomsday Clock is a tool for communicating how close we are to destroying the world with technologies of our own making. The risks we face from nuclear weapons, climate change, and disruptive technologies are all growing. Every second counts, and we are running out of time. It is a hard truth, but this is our reality. It is now 85 seconds to midnight. This is the closest the world has ever been to midnight.
Thank you for being with us today. My name is Daniel Holtz, and I serve as chair of the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. I am also a professor of physics at the University of Chicago. UChicago was the site of the first controlled nuclear chain reaction and was also where the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists was founded. The Doomsday Clock is now at 85 seconds to midnight, the closest it has been in the history of the clock. Last year, we warned that the world was perilously close to catastrophe and that countries needed to change course towards international cooperation and action on the most critical existential risks. Unfortunately, the opposite has happened. Rather than heed this warning, major countries became even more aggressive, adversarial, and nationalistic. Conflicts intensified in 2025, with multiple military operations involving nuclear-armed states. The last remaining treaty governing nuclear weapon stockpiles between the US and Russia expires next week. For the first time in over half a century, there will be nothing preventing a runaway nuclear arms race. On climate change, the assault on the environment has, if anything, escalated. Atmospheric carbon dioxide and global sea levels have reached record highs. Droughts, fires, floods, and storms continue to intensify and become more erratic, and this will only get worse. Grave dangers persist in the life sciences, particularly in emerging areas such as the development of synthetic mirror life. Despite repeated warnings from scientists worldwide, the international community has no coordinated plan, and the world remains unprepared for potentially devastating biological threats. AI is a significant and accelerating disruptive technology. AI is also supercharging mis and disinformation, which makes it even more difficult to address all of the other threats we consider. But instead of working towards international standards governing AI safety, we are running headlong into an AI arms race with what could be dire consequences. We're also concerned about the increasing rise of nationalistic autocracies. If the world splinters into an us versus them, zero-sum approach, it increases the likelihood that we all lose. These autocratic trends impede international cooperation, reduce accountability, and serve as a threat multiplier, making it even less likely that the world will address the existential threats at its doorstep. We note with alarm the recent tragedies in Minnesota and the erosion of the constitutional rights of American citizens. History has shown that when governments become unaccountable to their own citizens, conflict and misery follow. This global trend makes the world more dangerous for everyone. For all of these reasons, we move the clock forward. Our leaders need to do better. We need to do better. For more information on why the clock is at 85 seconds, please read our statement at thebulletin.org. Today, I am joined by Bulletin President and CEO Alexandra Bell and 4 colleagues from the Science and Security Board: National Security and Disruptive Technologies expert Steve Fetter, climate scientist Inez Fung, bio expert Asha George, and nuclear expert John Wolfstall. We are also honored to be joined by Maria Ressa, one of the world's most renowned and fearless journalists. Maria is the co-founder and CEO of Rappler and a professor at Columbia University. She was awarded the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize, cited for her efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. I can think of no better person to speak to this moment in history. Maria will make some remarks, and then we will follow with a press conference. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Daniel. Okay, 85 seconds to midnight. That is the closest we have ever been, and I'm going to say to the end of the world. You've just heard the threats we face: nuclear arsenals growing, climate records shattering, biological risks multiplying, artificial intelligence racing ahead of our ability to govern it. These are new triggers on top of the old problems which have been there, which the Sustainable Development Goals tried to address. All of that, of course, now is a dream, and it's gotten much worse. But I want to talk about something that makes all these threats even harder to address. The crisis beneath all the crisis, which you just saw, which I pointed out at the opening of the 80th UN General Assembly. We are living through an information Armageddon. That's brought about by the technology that rules our lives, from social media to generative AI. None of that tech is anchored in facts. Your chatbot is nothing but a probabilistic machine. Even as the tech moves from the attention economy to now targeting intimacy, human beings, we have been commodified by a predatory and extractive industry. Here are the three sentences I've said over and over since 2016. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we have no shared reality. We can't have journalism. We can't have democracy. The radical collaboration this moment demands becomes impossible. Think of shared facts as the operating system of collective action. Democracy runs on it. Diplomacy runs on it. Science runs on it. You corrupt that operating system, and every application fails. Climate negotiations fail. Arms control fails. Pandemic response fails. Not because we lack solutions, but because we can no longer agree on the problems. And the operating system has been corrupted deliberately, systematically, for profit. The platforms that mediate our information were built on an extractive and predatory model. They turned our attention into a commodity and our outrage into their business model. At the Nobel lecture, I called it toxic sludge. This brings out the worst of humanity. They don't connect us, they divide us. And in that division, they've enabled the collapse of cooperation and the rise of illiberal leaders who exploit chaos. As of last year, VDEM pointed out that 72% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. In my country, the Philippines, we lived through this. Disinformation enabled a brutal drug war. It attacked journalists. When I was first arrested in 2019, our top newspaper's headline adapted the Martin Niemöller quote, right? The headline was, "First, they came for the journalists. We don't know what happened next." Well, today, I've won 10 of the 11 criminal charges, the cases filed against me. I joke that the Philippines has now moved from hell to purgatory, and many of you in the West are now moving to hell. Because what happened in my country didn't stay there. That playbook has spread across the world. Last week in Davos, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney said this best. We are in the middle of a rupture, not a transition. The old order is not coming back, and that rupture was accelerated by the destruction of our public information ecosystem. We can't solve problems we can't agree exist. We can't cooperate across borders when we can't share the same facts. Now add generative AI, the chatbots that threaten to accelerate this chaos exponentially, floods of synthetic disinformation at near zero cost, AI slop victimizing millions in scams, supercharging the dysfunction in our information ecosystem. Oh yes, and killing our environment because of the resources it needs to run. But we're witnessing something more dangerous: the fusion of state power with the tech oligarchy. The men who control the platforms that shape what billions believe have merged with the men who control governments and militaries. Might makes right is the new operating principle, and they have the tools to manufacture consent or to simply drown out dissent. Just last week, the Nerve released research on how controlling the information ecosystem cements power. The title is Narrative Warfare and the Breakdown of Reality. It showed how in less than a year, what started as a meme became state policy and then kinetic reality in Venezuela. It shows a three-stage funnel. Narrative warfare fragments the shared reality, enabling the dismantling of institutions, clearing the path for corruption and kleptocracy. What happened in Venezuela? Greenland threatened, Minneapolis militarized, wars multiplying, not ending. This is what becomes possible when the battle for information integrity is lost. And while this happens, the clock keeps ticking. Nuclear arsenals grow while arms control collapses. Climate records shatter while the US wages war on renewable energy. The very cooperation we need to survive on AI, on pandemics, on the planet becomes impossible. 85 seconds to midnight. It is ticking, but it can be turned back. Can't leave you depressed. Now is the time to act, right? We need technology platforms redesigned around human rights, not engagement metrics. We need journalism funded as critical infrastructure. We need AI governance that prioritizes safety over speed. And we need middle powers, civil society, and citizens acting together because, as Canada pointed out, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. Information integrity is the mother of all battles because you can't run democracy on a corrupted operating system. You can't turn back the doomsday clock when half the world doesn't believe these problems even exist. But each of you watching, what can you do? You can do a lot because narrative warfare targets the cellular level of a democracy. That's each of us, the citizens. We think 3 buckets: technology, journalism, and community. We need to demand better from these extractive and predatory tech companies and join public interest tech like our Matrix Protocol chat app. It's open source, federated, end-to-end encrypted. Support independent journalism and build communities of action. At the worst of times, we in Rappler turned to our communities. Our citizens demanded better. And today, the reporting of journalists in the Philippines, working with civil society, has helped put our former president, the guy who tried to put me in jail, Rodrigo Duterte, he's now in jail at The Hague, facing charges of crimes against humanity. It took a whole of society approach. The destruction has happened. We're standing on the rubble of the world that was. Now it's time to create, to build the world we want that is more compassionate, more equal, more sustainable. 85 seconds to midnight. You know, the question now is not whether we can, the question is whether you will. What are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? Because the time to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for those powerful remarks. We'll now turn to the press for questions.
Thank you. If you wish to ask a question, you may use the raise your hand function and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. As a reminder, the Q&A period is for reporters only. If you're having issues with your own audio or the raise hand function, you can use the text-based Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to all the questions. Okay, let's take our first question from Sean Tandon at AFP. Sean, please unmute yourself.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for doing this. A couple of you touched on this in the comments, the situation in Minnesota. I was wondering if you could, I know this is global, not just the US, but I was wondering if you could describe how much Trump's first year in office affected your the decision to move the clock. I know last year there was some talk that he's already talking about peace and cooperation, at least rhetorically. Is there a disappointment? Is there to what extent have Trump's actions in the first year of his second term influenced this decision?
As we've discussed, there are many things that go into the setting of the clock, many different issues. We worry about climate, we worry about the nuclear threat, and of course we also worry about mis and disinformation. And we mentioned explicitly, we worry about the rise of autocracy and, as Maria eloquently described, sort of the erosion of democracies globally. So all of these things go in. There have been some actions that have made things much worse. There have been some actions that maybe give hope. What we do is we kind of combine all of these things. We don't divide it into what has this person said or done and how does that now. We look at it holistically and then make our assessment. So it's hard to, point at any one thing and say this was responsible for 1.3 seconds. Instead, we really try to capture the full sense of the world. And in our assessment, the full sense is bad. We're now jumping 4 seconds, which is a large jump, to 85 seconds, which is the closest it's been ever. So the main message is we should be worried, but there are many things that can be done that would turn back the clock. This is a fundamentally optimistic exercise. The whole point of this is there are ways to turn back the clock. We need to band together and take those actions. It's in all of our interests to do so.
Great. Let's take our next. Oh, sorry.
Daniel, if I might add, I think in terms of specific actions that we've seen from President Trump, he's repeatedly claimed humanity, and that's rhetoric that we can get behind. The problem is that rhetoric has not matched actions at all. He is in fact actively frittering away half a century worth of arms control efforts to keep stability between the two largest nuclear armed nations in the world. He's been attacking the tools and technologies that can help us manage climate change, attacking science and academia, the very people who will help us find these solutions. So obviously, actions of this administration have affected the clock, but the Doomsday Clock is about global risks. And what we've seen around the world is an egregious failure in leadership. No matter the government, a shift towards neo-imperialism, an Orwellian approach to governance will only serve to push the clock towards midnight.
Great, and just taking a question that seems like a good follow-up in the Q&A box, how would the Trump administration actually go about negotiating a new deal with Russia to maintain current nuclear limits or further reduce both countries' nuclear weapons?
John?
Sure. So I don't want to make it sound like this is simple, but this is a piece of low-hanging fruit that the Trump administration should have seized months ago. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, said that it would be a good idea for the United States and Russia to extend the limits under New START, which would allow each country no more than 1,550 nuclear weapons. Trump at the time says, sounds like a good idea. And then there was no staff work. There was nobody tasked to actually go and talk to the Russians about this. When Vladimir Putin and Trump met in Alaska, it didn't even come up. So to be frank, they could agree tomorrow. They could pick up the phone and say, let's just agree politically, we will keep this number and we will exchange data every 6 months as we did under the New START treaty until Russia stopped complying in 2023 to give our intelligence communities the means to verify that information. That would be a basic requirement to move this in the right direction and can be done today. Then there are people in the United States government, some of whom haven't been fired, who know how to negotiate these agreements, who know how to verify these agreements, and they should be sent to tasked to work with the Russians every single day until we come up with a new text. It could be at 1,500 weapons, it could be at 1,200 weapons, it could be at 1,700 weapons, but there needs to be some predictability in how many weapons the United States and Russia will deploy, and then to begin to engage China on the same thing. The reality is, under multiple administrations before Trump, this was the daily work of government and national security, and under Donald Trump, it has ceased. There are no smart people dedicated to protecting the United States working this problem, engaged with our adversaries to try to reduce this danger. And that's what has to change.
Great, let's take our next question from the Q&A box. How big of a concern are nuclear weapons in space and a military space race?
Steve, you want to take that one?
Yes, well, I do think this is a serious concern. And there's rapid technological change in space. The US is now launching more satellites every week than we launched every year 20 years ago. Some of those satellites, like Starlink, are being used to support military operations, such as operations in Ukraine. Russia and China have taken notice of that and have talked about how they might disable those satellites as the first act or an early act of war. And because there are so many Starlink satellites, perhaps one of the only ways to disable the whole constellation would be with a nuclear explosion. These concerns also relate to Golden Dome and President Trump's plan to put interceptors in space. That's another case where many thousands of interceptors would be needed, and Russia or China might counter that deployment by stationing nuclear weapons in orbit, by using nuclear weapons in space. So I do think this is a serious concern that has to be confronted.
Okay, let's move along to our next question. It's from Barnaby Naburka from the Interwire News Agency. Barnaby, go ahead and unmute yourself. Barnaby, we can't hear you yet.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Hello everybody. I have a question regarding autonomous weapon systems. The next generation of fighter jets, tanks and vessels are being manufactured with a similar technology to what we've seen with drones. So it's not just in terms of navigation and target acquisition, but even firing now is possible via artificial intelligence on board these weapon systems. And now I'd like to ask if the board is concerned by this trend and if they feel that the delegation of firing to algorithms is a potential risk with nuclear weapons now being involved.
The short answer is definitely yes, we're concerned. Maybe Steve, do you want to give a longer answer?
Well, the concerns about the reliability and transparency and the understandability of AI algorithms is well known, well identified, and that's particularly acute when the US, China, and other countries are racing to incorporate algorithms into autonomous weapons that would use these algorithms to automatically identify and target forces on the ground. Rather than try to impose some guardrails on this, countries are rather racing to develop and deploy these capabilities. So I think we do have to be very concerned about their reliability, trustworthiness in actual use.
Thank you. Let's go to our next question from the Q&A box. With the U.S. leaving the Paris Agreement, how do you expect the collaboration against climate change to shift?
Inez.
I think I agree it's the last three COPs, Conference of Parties, have not focused on emissions. They focused on adaptation and justice, which are all very important. Here the private sector has been working independent of the government. Green technologies are mature and economical, and there's a lot of work in the private sector to transition. And it is much easier to use, for example, to plug in a car than to wait in line for the gas station. So there's lots of things that are happening which will drive the government into action. And I hope that the grassroots or the private sector and the governments can work together to see that it is a win-win for all if we go in the renewable energy and not rely on fossil fuels.
Thank you. Moving along, another Q&A box question. In terms of biological threats, what are the top factors that affected your assessment, and are we prepared for another pandemic?
Sure. Yes. In terms of the top factors, I would say we were looking at the offensive biological weapons programs that are currently possessed by Russia and North Korea, and the suspicion that other countries have those as well, number one. We were looking at the rate of increase in numbers of high-level laboratories all throughout the world, working with very dangerous pathogens and not necessarily putting in all the safety and security requirements that would be needed to do that. Thirdly, we were looking at the continued movement of diseases throughout the world, creating pandemics. It's been quite some time now where we've just been dealing with anywhere from 7 to 10 pandemics at once throughout the world. And then fourthly, as Daniel said earlier, we are looking at increased emphasis on high-level biology for to synthesize organisms, to modify organisms, and to create what is now known as mirror life, which has DNA that goes the opposite direction and would be very toxic to all life here on the planet and could destroy it all. We we made that assessment, taking all of those things into consideration, and move forward with our determination of what the risk would be.
And if I could also just
Please.
add, there is the concern that artificial intelligence could be used to design novel pathogens.
All right, going to our next question. It comes from Julia Levy at Northwestern University Medill Climate Change News. Julia, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. My question is, how in particular can young people mobilize and educate themselves against these threats, such as you mentioned, misinformation, AI, and the coming threats of climate change? And do you have any advice for those who might feel disillusioned to find awareness for these threats or even to start to enact that change?
Maria, do you want to start on that?
Yeah. Look, I keep saying in the Philippines, it was the young people that led it, right? The first step is really make sure you have facts. And so how do you have a shared reality? You start with yourself and your family and friends, the shared reality you build. Then you bring your community together. We say we build communities of action. The third phase may be to begin working on your leaders. If you're here in America, for sure, you should be doing that. And what does civic engagement look like in today's day and age? I also would shift away from the word misinformation. I think that's something that tech lobby has done a lot to. The problem is disinformation when someone is trying to change the facts. I guess the last part is that the idealism. That's incredibly important at this point in time because this is a moment to create. And I think that's also incredibly empowering for young people.
I want to echo that last point that Maria made, which is, this is a very complicated range of threats. But what that means is that there are many different ways to have impact. And the question of how you engage with these threats on a personal level, that's a deeply personal question. And it depends on your skills and your interests. And if you're an artist, you can make art that is related to this, or scientists can work on the threats and find ways to mitigate, or whatever it is you do, try to bring this on board. These threats impact us all, and find ways, carrying that forward and turning that into action is exactly what we need. And it's sort of this next generation especially, it's their creativity and their passion that's going to help address these threats and carry us through our future.
Great. Let's take another question from the Q&A box. Given the current dangerous directions we're on, where can we see a sign of hope that the clock can be turned back? Are there any practical examples of specific projects that could reverse the pattern if implemented? Positive notes, anything like that?
Alex, please.
Yeah, I think these problems can seem overwhelming if you simply focus on the volume, the scale, the interconnected nature of all these threats. Uh, but I think the thing to remember is these are human-caused existential threats. We created these problems, and thus we have the ability to fix them. And it can't be done all at once. There's no single elegant solution for any of the problems that we're facing, but these problems are solvable. So like Maria and Daniel said, simply availing yourself of the information, re-entering this conversation that, quite frankly, I think a lot of people have been happy to keep the public out of. Is re-enter, get information about these threats, talk with your communities, with your civic groups, with your friends, with your families, ask your elected leaders at every level what they're doing about these issues. Every time we've been able to turn back the hands of the clock, it's been because we had scientists and experts working to find solutions, and a public that was demanding action, a public that demanded to see these tools, technologies applied for helping humanity, not harming it. So whether it's getting back to the table on arms control agreements, demanding that our leaders go to the negotiating table, demanding that we take the steps to push back against climate change and extreme weather, something many people around the US at least are experiencing today. These are all things that we can continue to work on, but they won't go away just by ignoring them. And there's no doubt that the scale of problems that people face on a day-to-day level can be consuming. But if we get these problems wrong, nothing else will matter. So we need people to incorporate this into the challenges that we're facing, but together we can make a difference.
Maria.
Yeah, I think there are many success stories on every single one, but one of the things we need to realize is that our public information ecosystem will not give it to you. You have to actively create your shared reality so you find the facts. So you heard from the scientists here and the experts of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, but beyond that, once you have the shared reality, then you can act together. That's important for any democracy, right? And I'll use us as an example in the Philippines. By all intents and purposes, I should probably be in jail, right? Rappler should have been shut down. Our lawyers told us in 2016 we were crazy to keep doing our jobs, but we did. I think the last part we haven't really mentioned is values, right? Remember the shared values we have that brought us all together, that created this peaceful world. And then you move forward on that. So look, our shared reality in the Philippines, right? We now have the man who had brutally killed maybe tens of thousands of people. He was arrested in March last year. Rodrigo Duterte is in jail at The Hague waiting for a trial for crimes against humanity. And that is journalists working with civil society.
Thank you, everybody. We probably have time for just one final question before we go to closing remarks from our speakers. Let's take this from the Q&A box. Today is actually National Day of Remembrance for Downwinders in the United States and the 75th anniversary of the first atmospheric nuclear test at the Nevada test site. And last year, the Trump administration floated the idea of restarting nuclear testing. What effect would that decision have on the Doomsday Clock?
John.
So we don't get into the business of predicting if the government does this or if that person does that, then the clock will change this much. We obviously had factored in the statements by President Trump that he was thinking about restarting nuclear testing, and then the confusion that was created. There's no doubt from my point of view as an expert that any country restarting nuclear tests would be incredibly damaging, both to the planet. We stopped testing nuclear weapons because it produces a highly radioactive contaminated material, but also because it would be a serious negative impact on global stability and security. If the United States were to resume nuclear testing, Russia and China would rapidly follow suit. They would be able to make much more progress in modernizing their nuclear weapons than the United States ever could, because our weapons and our testing program actually was much more advanced when we shut it down in 1991. And so from a US point of view, it would be a loss in security, but it would also normalize nuclear weapons, nuclear testing, and nuclear threats even more than they have been. And that can only be a step in a negative direction. There is no world that is better off when major countries are exploding nuclear weapons and hinting that these things are usable and that we're prepared to use them. That's just the basic requirement. You don't need to be a member of the Science and Security Board to recognize that as a negative development.
Okay. That's all the time we have for questions, and we're going to go next to closing remarks from our speakers.
So thank you all for your questions. I'd like to give my colleagues a chance for brief closing statements. Alex, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Daniel. First, thanks so much to the people around the world that read and support the Bulletin. I'm glad so many people are watching today, and I hope your interest will extend to reading the Bulletin. And for 80 years, we've been connecting the world's leading experts on existential risk directly to the public and to policymakers, including by outlining our relative level of risk via the Doomsday Clock. But it's important to remember that the clock does not predict the future. It illuminates our current reality. The clock has turned back before, and it can again. People around the world, as I said, must demand their leaders combat the risks that threaten us all, or perhaps find leaders that will. For hope and inspiration, look to the brave civil servants, service members, journalists, experts, advocates, artists, citizens that continue to fight every day for a better future. We and they know our current trajectory is unsustainable. While these challenges can seem overwhelming, everyone watching today, everyone around the world has agency. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. With 85 seconds left to midnight, we have to come together and we have to push for change. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Steve?
The pace of technological change is accelerating in artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons, biotechnology, in space. Companies and countries are engaged in a headlong race for dominance. Citizens need to demand that their governments do more and cooperate to identify and mitigate the risks of disruptive emerging technologies.
Thanks, Steve. Inez?
Our civilization is in transition from one that's powered by fossil energy to one that is powered by renewable energies. Much of the technologies for renewables are mature and affordable. And we just need to fight climate change. Not only do we have to do our own parts, but we need the leadership to work together to implement the solutions on a global scale. Thank you.
Thanks, Inez. Asha?
Yeah, I would say that just the way disease is pandemic and all around the world, people who can do something about these issues, including disease, are also all around the world. We can do a great deal if we work together and if we figure out what our common areas are of concern. We can shape the global future. We can do that. We do it every single day. We just have to get organized and get on top of it. But it is possible. It is fully possible. We just have to make it a priority and move forward.
Thanks, Asha. John?
We've talked about how overwhelming all of these threats can seem and how it can lead people just to tune out. Too big a problem, I just can't solve it. The reality is that all of these problems are solvable. These are all human manufactured problems, and we have both the technology and the capability to reverse them if we make a commitment. Just as an example, the United States is going to spend $100 billion this year modernizing and building new nuclear weapons, and we're not going to spend 1/10 of 1% on that in pursuing technologies to verify the elimination of nuclear weapons. My old boss, Joe Biden, used to say, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you care about. We're just not trying. And the people need to demand that the public effort, that the government's efforts are sufficient to address the threats that we face.
Thanks, John. Maria?
Information integrity, knowing the difference between fact and fiction, that is the mother of all battles. Shared facts are the operating system of collective action, and that system has been corrupted. The threats you heard today, nuclear, climate, biological, technological, none of this can be solved by nations running on separate, incompatible realities. So we fix the operating system and we restore the possibility of cooperation. That is where hope lives. That's where my hope lives. That's where we must fight.
Thanks, Maria. The Doomsday Clock is now the closest it has ever been to midnight. That is the bad news. The good news is that we are fully capable of turning back the clock. The clock has moved away from midnight in the past, and it could and must do so again in the future. The tools needed to reduce these existential threats exist. What we lack is international cooperation, political courage, and a global citizen call to action. Every person everywhere has a stake in addressing these threats. To those of you around the world viewing today, let's use the coming year to turn back the hands of the Doomsday Clock. On behalf of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, I thank you all for your time and your attention. We are adjourned.